Please have a seat. I don't think there's enough press here. Well, good evening, everyone. Before turning to the important work we accomplished here at the G7, I want to take a few minutes addressing the budget negotiations that I'm heading back home to deal with. Before I left for this trip, I met with all 4 congressional leaders, and we agreed the only way to move forward was in a bipartisan agreement. And I've done my part. We put forward a proposal to cut spending by more than $1 trillion, on top of the nearly $3 trillion in deficit reduction that I previously proposed through the combination of spending cuts and new revenues. Now it's time for the other side to move from their extreme positions, because much of what they've already proposed is simply, quite frankly, unacceptable. And so let me be clear. I'm not going to agree to a deal that protects, for example, $30 billion tax break for the oil industry, which made $200 billion last year. They don't need an incentive of another $30 billion, while putting health care of 21 million Americans at risk by going after Medicaid. I'm not going to agree to a deal that protects $200 billion in excess payments for pharmaceutical industries and refusing to count that, while cutting over 100,000 school teachers and assistance jobs, 30,000 law enforcement officers jobs cut across the entire United States of America. I'm not going to agree to a deal that protects wealthy tax cheats and crypto traders while putting food assistance at risk for nearly 1 million Americans. And it's time for Republicans to accept that there is no bipartisan deal to be made solely on their partisan terms. They have to move as well. All 4 congressional leaders agree with me that default is not, let me say it again, default is not an option. And I expect each of these leaders, to live up to that commitment. America has never defaulted on our debt, and it never will. The Speaker and I will be talking later on the plane as we head back, because it's 5 or 6, 7 o'clock in the morning there, and our teams are going to continue working. Now, we've had a packed few days here in Hiroshima, and I think with very productive and important meetings at the G7 summit. We also held the Quad meeting here in Hiroshima rather than Australia, and important bilateral discussions with Prime Minister Kishida of Japan, Prime Minister Albanese of Australia, and President Zelensky of Ukraine, as well as the Prime Minister of India. This is my 3rd trip to the Indo-Pacific as president, and I look forward to rescheduling my stops in Papua New Guinea and Australia later. I've spoken with the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, and Secretary Blinken is traveling there to meet with the Pacific Island partners at that moment. And I'm also going to be hosting, and I've spoken with the Prime Minister, hosting the leaders of the Pacific Island Forum in Washington this fall, because I've been unable to make it to Papua New Guinea. And Prime Minister Albanese, we're going to have a state visit later this year. And I also want to thank President Kishida for his outstanding, and it's not hyperbole, his outstanding leadership of the G7 this year, as well as Mrs. Kishida and the entire Japanese government for the hospitality they've shown to Jill, myself, and our whole team. Being in this city and visiting the memorial on Friday was a powerful reminder of the devastating reality of nuclear war and our shared responsibility to never cease our efforts to build for peace. And together with the leaders of the G7, we have reiterated our commitment to continue to work toward a world free from the threat of nuclear weapons. Over the past few days have showcased the unity of purpose among the G7. It's a very different organization than it was 5, 7, 10 years ago, because we're addressing the challenges that matter most to the world. We're united in our efforts to strengthen global health security. And yesterday I announced that the United States plans to contribute another $250 million to the pandemic fund at the World Bank to make sure the world is better prepared to prevent, detect, and respond to future pandemics. We're united in our commitment to climate action and accelerating the transition to a global clean energy economy by investing in the industries of the future. We're united in our push to build a more resilient and inclusive global economy that can better withstand the kinds of shocks that we've experienced over the last few years, including by building a more secure and more diversified supply chain. Through the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, which we launched last year at the G7 summit in Germany, we've addressed the infrastructure needs that are holding back too many low and moderate income countries, particularly in the global South. The United States has already mobilized more than $30 billion in PGII projects around the globe, a significant step toward our collective pledge of the G7 to mobilize $600 billion in investment by 2027. And we've resolved to reform the multilateral development banks to give them more flexibility and better able to fight poverty by helping respond to global challenges. Now, we're also united in our approach to the People's Republic of China. And the joint statement released yesterday outlines the shared principles we've all agreed at the G7 and beyond dealing with China. We're not looking to decouple from China. We're looking to de-risk and diversify our relationship with China. That means taking steps to diversify our supply chains, and we're not dependent on any one country for necessary product. It means resisting economic coercion together and countering harmful practices that hurt our workers. It means protecting a narrow set of advanced technologies critical for our national security. And those elements are all agreed on by the G7. Finally, joined here in Hiroshima by President Zelensky, and the G7 reaffirmed our shared and unwavering, let me say it again, our shared and unwavering commitment to stand with the brave people of Ukraine as they defend themselves against Russia's brutal war of aggression and the war crimes being committed. Together with our partner countries, we reiterated the need for a just peace that respects Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, both core principles of the UN Charter. Russia started this war, and Russia could end it today by withdrawing its troops from Ukraine, internationally recognized borders, and ceasing its assault. Until then, Ukraine's ability to defend itself is essential to being able to end this war permanently and through diplomacy. You know, and this morning, I once more shared and assured President Zelensky, together with all G7 members and our allies and partners around the world, that we will not waver. Putin will not break our resolve as he thought he could 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago. We're going to continue to provide economic, humanitarian, and security assistance to Ukraine so it can stand strong as long as it needs it. And today, the United States announced our latest tranche of artillery, ammunition, anti-tank weapons, and bridging equipment to help Ukraine succeed in the battlefield. You know, in my private meeting with President Zelensky after the G7 meeting and with his staff, I told him the United States, together with our allies and partners, is going to begin training Ukrainian pilots in fourth-generation fighter aircraft, including F-16s, to strengthen Ukraine's Air Force as part of a long-term commitment to Ukraine's ability to defend itself. We provided the last year all that they needed to deal with what they were dealing with at the moment. And that's when now we're moving in the direction of putting them in a position to be able to defend themselves in ways beyond what they've had to deal with so far. The past few days have once more underscored how important America's global leadership is. Presumptuous thing for an American president to say, but I think you'll find if you ask any of our colleagues, it's true. The security and prosperity of the American people are substantially increased by working in concert with our closest allies and partners to build a future of greater economic strength and resilience and a world that is more peaceful and stable. And on many of these issues that matter to the American people, accelerating our clean energy transition, preventing another pandemic, dealing with China, standing up for Ukraine, the meetings I've had with my fellow G7 leaders have left us more united, more resolved, and more determined to set up for the greater progress in the months ahead. And this has been an extremely significant and important summit.